Where do you see the autopsy initiative going?
From the death of Amadou Diallo, who really changed my life, to the death of Earl Faison, to LaShawn Thompson, who we just did a second review down in Fulton County Jail that led to a current Department of Justice investigation into the Fulton County Jail because of what Know Your Rights camp was willing to do, and investment in review of that case. What this is doing is critical to giving answers to families. And so the future is being able to do this truly across the country. Really having regional centers for second autopsy, forensic autopsies, so that travel and transportation can be cut down.
It's expensive.
Ensuring that we have really a kind of a pipeline of forensic pathologists that have been properly trained and understand it. We're showing the discrepancies, not just in the courtroom, but also in the public health space.
Hi, I'm Nicole Martin, and this is the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. And today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Mitchell. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Nicole, how's it going? I just got into LA, and I love it. The weather is great. It's a little windy outside, so,
Still sunny, though. Still sunny.
Yeah, it's a little windy, though.
Yeah, well, we're so glad to have you
It's good to be here. It's good to be here.
And so Dr. Mitchell is our forensic pathologist coordinator. So can you explain kind of a little bit into history, into your career and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a forensic pathologist, and for listeners and viewers of the podcast, that's a physician that studies how people die and how they die from trauma or from overdoses or naturals. It's a lot of people watch NCIS or CSI, and they have their favorite forensic pathologist on the TV screen. And so I'm a real life forensic pathologist. I started my career at the FBI. I was a forensic scientist for the FBI back in the 90s, and then went on to medical school to study violence as a public health issue. And been really looking at how violence impacts our community, particularly communities, Black and brown communities and poor communities, how violence impacts those communities and our communities. And one of the areas of violence that impacts our community are police violence, and deaths that occur associated with the criminal legal system. So I've been doing it for a long time. I've been a board certified forensic pathologist since 2007. But before then, really engaging in community.
And what made you want to go into forensic pathology specifically?
So, I was at the FBI, and I was an EAP coordinator. We helped agents that were exposed to violence kind of handle the violence that they were exposed to. And then I got exposed to this concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is something people know about. If you've been exposed to trauma, then that can affect your emotions, can affect your behavior.
Right.
And so while studying that at the Bureau, I made the connection, and was really early when these connections were being made, that if someone was exposed to trauma or exposed to violence, then they might be prone to violence. And I said, well, that might be happening in my community. That might be happening in poor communities where there's a lot of violence. And so I thought the best way to study violence as a public health issue was to go to med school to become a forensic pathologist, seeing I was already a forensic biologist. But I'm not the only one in the Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative. You're in the Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative.
Thank you, yes.
So you're not going to sit here and just interview me, right?
Really? Are you sure?
No, we're
sure?
going to talk about you a little bit. So, you're an attorney, right?
I am.
And so talk a little bit about your journey in being an attorney, and not only in being an attorney, but this is a pretty heavy subject matter for any attorney to
Right.
engage in this autopsy initiative here at Know Your Rights Camp. So talk a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So, for the viewers who don't know, we have an autopsy initiative where we provide free autopsies for in custody deaths, and we provide 3 services. We provide an independent secondary autopsy conducted by a board certified pathologist on our panel, such as Dr. Mitchell.
That's what I do.
You're right.
Okay.
And then we also have a preliminary findings discussion, and then a issuance of a final autopsy report. And so I wanted to work with Know Your Rights Camp since 2016 when I was an undergrad, actually. And I wrote my senior honors thesis on race and consequences, analyzing police abuse in America. And so I was drawn to Colin's advocacy. I think when we think of why we're both sitting here, it's because of Colin. And I was inspired by the advocacy and initiative that he took to directly serve his community, and then ultimately end up being blackballed and lost his career for his advocacy. So I knew that I wanted to work with Know Your Rights Camp because I knew that the work that we do here is meaningful work that is actually serving families. So when I decided that I wanted to go to law school, I knew that I wanted to be an advocate. Similarly, I wanted to stand up for my community, for Black and Brown communities. I wanted to be able to be a resource and be an advocate. So when the start of the autopsy initiative came about, I knew this was a space for me to be in. And you've been here since the very beginning of the stages. So I think that it would be helpful where we can talk about kind of the development of the autopsy initiative and how we even got to this point. And so before we even launched the autopsy initiative, we did about 8 months of prep together. And so you and I had several phone conversations because as an attorney, I didn't have a background in forensics. A lot of my knowledge from forensics was more from research and from our conversations with our team and with you. And to think that we launched the program in February of 2022, we spent 8 months into prepping to even launch the program. And now in March 2024, we've now completed 82 autopsies and provided these services free of cost to the victims' families. I'm happy with the work that we've been able to do, but we know that there's more families that we want to serve, of course. And when I think of what are some of our hopes for the initiative, one, we would hope that this initiative doesn't need to exist to begin with. We are hoping that these in-custody deaths stop occurring, these police-related deaths stop occurring, but we know that as these police-related deaths continue, we need our initiative to bring transparency. So I want to ask you, as a forensic pathologist coordinator for our autopsy initiative, why is it important that we're giving these secondary autopsies?
Well, I think that's a great question, and shout out to you, right?
And you
for seeing, and it's exposure, right? Mm-hmm. You can only be what you're exposed to, right? So that exposure and advocacy turns you into this career and into this advocacy. So there's opportunities for people, hopefully, to even see this podcast and want to engage in work for community the way that you did, right? To put it in context for everybody and for you and for us and for this conversation, for physicians and for medicine, a second opinion is a mainstay. Mm-hmm. It's a mainstay in how we engage our healthcare, right? No HIPAA issue. I'm going to tell my mother's story. My mother came home with a diagnosis of multiple myeloma. And multiple myeloma is, a disease of the blood, particular cells put out proteins. Those proteins cause a problem, and you can die from multiple myeloma if not treated. So it's a cancer. So the first thing we did was, okay, we need to go and find another hematologist. Mm-hmm. We need to go find another hematologist to take a look at all of the tests and everything that was done and get a second opinion.
Right.
The first hematologist didn't feel bad about that. First hematologist said, yes, you should get a second opinion. Mm-hmm. Because physicians know that, medicine is collaborative. Well, we got the second opinion. Turns out she did not have multiple myeloma.
Oh, I'm
right?
glad. I'm
happy.
Right.
Phenomenal.
But you wouldn't have known that until you got
But
that
we had to
second
get the second opinion, right? And once the second opinion was brought to the first first hematologist, that first hematologist was like, yeah, right. That, there was a collaborative.
Right.
Well, in forensic medicine, that doesn't exist. In forensic medicine, the forensic pathologist that did the first autopsy, often can be offended if a second autopsy is done. There's actually had been a debate on the merits of second autopsies and suggesting that someone who does a second autopsy has a financial interest in finding something different than the first, right? Somehow ethics are a problem if you're doing a second autopsy. And the reality of it is that a second autopsy is a second opinion. It's another opportunity to have a finding. Right. And particularly in deaths in custody. Because in deaths in custody, and when we talk about deaths in custody, Nicole, we're talking about a continuum of when an individual first comes into contact with law enforcement during their arrest, right, all the way through when they're incarcerated, right? All the way through, and there can be any causes and manners across that continuum. So right. Not all deaths in custody are homicides, right? Matter of fact, the majority of deaths in custody are occurring in the incarceration phase, right? And the majority of those are naturals. And when they're not natural, the majority of them are suicides, right? And so it's important for us to get that second autopsy because oftentimes law enforcement will clam up. Right. The medical examiner will clam up, right? And not talk to families. Right. And what we do here at Know Your Rights is that we are able to give them clarity and give them understanding of what's going on with their particular family member. Right. And that's the huge part of why the autopsy initiative is important. You said that there was 82. Yes, 82 right? As of today. And can you talk a little bit about where in the country these are happening? Because I can imagine, right, that it's all over the country. Definitely. And so can you talk a little bit about what we've seen across the country? Absolutely. Because we provide these services nationwide, we do have cases from several states in the U.S. We've gotten a lot of requests from California in particular. We've also gotten a lot in the South as well, also in Florida, in Georgia, in Texas. We've had some, you've done several for us on the East Coast as well. So we've gotten New York, D.C. So I would say we're providing these services nationwide. And as we were thinking of how we even got to this point, as an attorney, we're also dealing with 50 different states' laws as well. And so I think another important part of our process that we want to explain as well is the transport coordination that has to go into. There's a lot of transport.
Right, so much because the pathologist has to be licensed in the state where they're performing the autopsy. We're also covering the costs of transportation to get the victim transported to the pathologist for that autopsy. So I would say that there is a lot of coordination in our process as well. And one of the challenges that we've had is the lack of forensic pathologists that exist to begin with, I think. And so we're going to go back to that question. Before I lose it, I actually want you to talk about just kind of the lack of forensic pathologists that there are, because that is a challenge as we're providing these services, is that we carefully vet our pathologists on our panel, and the people that we have performing these secondary autopsies, we trust to be objective in being able to perform the autopsy and using high quality forensic procedures. And so because there's such a small amount of forensic pathologists and an even smaller amount of minority forensic pathologists, I just want to kind of hear your opinion on that and what you've seen.
Well, Nicole, you said it, right? I mean, because we sit and have this conversation without microphones a lot, right? Yeah. We have this conversation, and for the benefit of the people that are kind of in our conversations that we have on a regular basis, there's only a couple thousand forensic pathologists in the country that are board certified. And, I think there's maybe about a little bit over, maybe about 100, African-American.
Very small amount.
Forensic pathologists in the country. I don't have the exact numbers. And say, well, why is that important? Well, I'm finding that it is important in forensic medicine.
Right.
You would think it wouldn't be. because autopsy is a procedure.
Right.
It's a surgical procedure that we perform, and it's a way you perform it and how you perform it, and what you find you interpret. And we've been taught how to interpret those findings. But you know that there's autopsies that I'm doing, a second autopsies from Know Your Rights Camp, where the first autopsy wasn't even done completely.
We've had 3 of those cases, actually, where the family was told that an autopsy was performed. Our pathologists come in to do the second autopsy, and they're finding out that no autopsy was even done. Is that something you've seen before?
I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
In this. But not only that no autopsy at all was performed,
Yeah.
but sometimes the autopsy, most of the time, the majority of the time, the autopsy that has been done it was incomplete.
Right.
And what makes me the expert on a complete autopsy? Well, I led a group of forensic pathologists that wrote the guidelines, the position on how death in custody autopsies should be performed in this country, right? And quite frankly, internationally.
Right.
And so I follow that protocol when I'm doing my autopsies for death in custody, which requires a full, lengthy dissection. Even when you don't think you're going to find something, you're supposed to do these procedures to ensure that if there is something there, then you find it. It's not only the quantity of forensic pathologists to your question, right?
Right.
It is the quality of the training of the forensic pathologist. So really the future of this work is getting more forensic pathologists interested in death in custody approaches,
Right.
and ensuring that there's a uniformity of practice, right? And so this advocacy, you know, I got called. You know, I've been watching Colin Kaepernick, you know, throw that ball around for a while, right?
Right.
It's always good to see a brother that can play ball, right? And because of I've been doing this work, I was one of the first to write on death in custody back in 1999 and 2000. So I've been doing this work for a long time.
Right.
For 25 years, I've been in this work. So when you start seeing athletes kneeling and taking stands, you're like, heck yeah, that's awesome.
Right.
But then I got a phone call from a forensic pathologist who asked me to become part of the Colin Kaepernick Autopsy Initiative. I said, Colin Kaepernick has a what? And at that point I said, if I've been doing this work for so long, I can't have Mr. Kaepernick out here doing this work and not having everything covered.
Right.
And that's why, and we had this conversation, right?
Yeah.
That's
several.
why. So talk to us. I think it's important for people to know that that Know Your Rights didn't just pick up and decide to do autopsies.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about kind of the 8 months, but even over the last year, what we've been doing to even refine our process?
Of course. I mean, even thinking from where we started to where we are now is a huge process. And how this even started to begin with is this started with Colin's vision. And Colin wanted to be able to provide direct support to victims' families who have lost their loved ones due to a police-related death. And so as we were thinking about the types of support that we could provide, one of the first was alleviating the financial cost of an autopsy. I had no idea that autopsies can cost up to $10,000 to $15,000, including the associated transportation. And imagine a family member going through a tragic loss. Grieving is already difficult enough, but on top of that, to lose your loved one in an in-custody death, in a police-related death, and then to not even know what happened to their loved one. A lot of the family members have said that they're not even able to start their grieving process until they know what has happened to their loved one. And so Colin wanted to make sure that we were going to be paying that cost of the autopsy. So we wanted to be able to provide this service for free. The second thing is we wanted to make sure that we were knowing what is happening to someone's loved one. And that's why we had to create our own independent team of pathologists, of people who we trust to be objective, to perform these secondary autopsies. So we also wanted to provide transparency within the autopsy process. And the third factor is that by having a second opinion, by having a secondary autopsy report, we're also allowing families to have a basis to even bring a lawsuit. So as an attorney, I could understand that lens. I can understand that having a cause of death from a forensic pathologist, what that can mean in someone's lawsuit. And that can mean them obtaining justice, obtaining compensation. Although they're never able to bring their loved one back, they should receive compensation for losing their loved one in that way. And so us being able to be in a position to assist others within that process, to give them a basis to bring a lawsuit, has been something that has been super significant for the program. And there have been 2 $100 million lawsuits based off of our findings that we've provided. There have also been other lawsuits filed on behalf of the jails where their loved one died in custody. So I think that we wish that this program didn't need to exist, but we also see the injustices that are occurring even after this person has passed away.
Two of the words that just happened that you said that hit me is objectivity and transparency.
Yeah.
Objectivity and transparency. And I don't want, the viewers of this podcast, listeners, to think that every single second autopsy we do turns out to be different than the first.
Right.
Right? The majority of the autopsies that we do, the second autopsies we do, are exactly what the first autopsy showed, right? If the system, that first medical examiner system, that first coroner system, was willing to be transparent and was willing to talk to families and work with those families at the point in which their loved one died, give those families that information, then that's another way that families could get closure.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, in what we're doing, that original law enforcement agency, that original medical examiner system, coroner system, refuses to talk to families.
Right.
Refuses to talk to families. And we are actually not only providing a service of forensic medicine, but we are often providing a service of healing to families.
Yes.
I've spent, and we both can talk about our own experiences. I've been on the phone with families, and the least of which we talked about was the forensic medicine.
Yeah.
I was just there listening to how great of a guy he was, how important he was, how, man, maybe he just had a problem. He needed some help. He didn't need this. And the stories that they tell about their loved ones, if we would just stop and understand the importance of people, right? So talk a little bit, we've been talking technically. Talk a little bit about the emotion that goes into this.
Yeah.
How does this hit for you?
Each day is emotional. I think when we first started, I cried every single day for 3 weeks straight. I cried every day. Because I think when we were launching the program, we didn't really know what to expect. No one in the world is doing what we're doing. No one has this type of initiative. So we know we were hoping to assist families. We had our procedures in place, but we didn't know if that still meant that families were going to reach out to us. And when we first started the program, I was the only full-time employee for the Autopsy initiative before we expanded. We now have 2 great team members, Kiana and Griselda. So
Shout out.
Right. So excited to have them here. But it was a lot. I remember the first case that we got, I believe it was a Friday night, and it was probably like 9 p.m. later your time, and I just called you. I was like, we have a case, and it was just it didn't feel real until you're talking to someone's family directly. And so within these 80 cases, we're speaking directly with the families. And I think exactly what you said about we just need to listen and give them a space to vent sometimes, because a lot of the families that we're speaking to, no one's listening to them. No one's making their loved one feel that they're valued. And so it does take a lot of emotional energy to be able to do that. But we have to keep in mind that we're here for a larger purpose, and that the loss that they're experiencing, we have to be able to be their support. We have to be their strength. People have often called us their hope, their light. People have told me directly about you, how helpful it was to speak with you, how they feel that we have their loved one's best interests in mind. And I think that in these in-custody death cases, the families, they don't know who to trust. They don't know who they can turn to. They don't know who they can go to. And so for us, it was critical that we build a system of support for the families. And so that's something that we've done internally through management, and then also on the pathologist side as well too. I can say that the preliminary findings discussions that are being had with the families, that has brought them so much help in just being able to understand what happened. And so I think that dealing with death is very difficult to do, and you do it often, and I think it's never easy to do. It's never easy to get a new request, but when we see why our program is needed, that's what is able to keep me going and showing why we need our program. And so even with the discrepancies that we've seen so far within the autopsies that we've done, we've already talked about, we saw people being lied to and no autopsy even being performed.
Yeah.
We've seen a medical examiner rule the cause of death as a natural cause, and then our pathologists finding out they were strangled. So we've seen discrepancies. We've seen that we cannot put ourselves in the position to not do the second opinion, because like you said, just having the second opinion on its own is going to bring more clarity. And we have to make sure that we're doing it in an empathetic way as well. So I think it's always, for me, being able to put the family needs above our own. And it's understanding that they're already going through such a tragic time and loss that it's our responsibility to be their support, to be there for them. And so as I've said, we've had several people comment on how significant our autopsy initiative has been. And so the family's feedback is why we keep going. If we weren't serving the families, our program would be doing no justice. But because we know that the families are directly being impacted by the work that we do, it makes me feel as if I'm a part of something larger than myself. And I think there's great hopes for where the autopsy initiative can be. I think that, yes, us doing 82 cases as a new program is amazing for the work that we've been able to do so far. But we know that police-related deaths are occurring on a much larger scale than that. And so ideally, we would like it to be almost automatic, where there's an in-custody death and people just know to come to us to get that second opinion. And so I want to ask you, where do you think, we've talked several times about strategies and where the autopsy initiative can go and what we need to do, because we're constantly trying to get better. We're constantly trying to improve our services, make our process more efficient, serve more families. So where do you see the autopsy initiative going?
Well, I mean, like you said, it's come so far.
Right.
Right. And especially, my 25 years of dealing with, and this country, right? This country has been seeing the death of poor Black and brown people at the hands of law enforcement since its inception.
Right.
This country has been built upon the blood of the disenfranchised. And so over the last 25 years, from the death of Amadou Diallo, who really changed my life, to the death of Earl Faison, to LaShawn Thompson, who we just did a second review down in Fulton County Jail that led to a current Department of Justice investigation into the Fulton County Jail because of what Know Your Rights camp was willing to do, and investment in review of that case. To really leading to the book that I wrote called Death in Custody, How America Ignores the Truth and What We Can Do About It. That categorizes and codifies the work of people like you, right? The Ida B. Welleses that are doing the work, right? That are willing to do the advocacy, the journalists, the general person just on the street that doesn't want to take it anymore.
Right.
We in this book talk about this arc of individuals outside of government that is bringing knowledge and bringing perspective to those that are dying associated with the criminal justice system. And then we have the podcasts, right? Official Ignorance, the Death in Custody podcast, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award, right? Shout out to that.
Yeah, right. And just starting. You said
Right,
not
and
even
just
a year
starting,
yet.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but that piece highlights, again, what individuals outside of government have been doing. When the majority of these cases, if not all of them, their first medical examination is and would be a government official. Hence why we call it official ignorance. Because what this is doing is critical to giving answers to families. And so the future is being able to do this truly across the country. You know, really having regional centers for second autopsy, forensic autopsies, so that travel and transportation can be cut down.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Ensuring that we have really a kind of a pipeline of forensic pathologists that have been properly trained and understand it, right? That we can really ensure that the right forensic pathologists are in these centers that understand the impact of complete autopsy examinations and medicine and injury, and in a place where we're putting out our annual reports, we're putting out data, we're showing the discrepancies, not just in the courtroom, but also in the public health space. Public health, this is a public health issue. Mortality is a public health issue. How we know Black women are dying at a higher rate from in and around their pregnancy is because we see a checkbox on the U.S. standard death certificate that tells us that that woman was pregnant when she died, right? And so right now, you talked about there's some that we know and there's many more that we don't. The reality of it is that the federal government today is not counting all of the deaths that are occurring in our criminal legal system. They're just not. They're not accurately doing it, and they're charged to do it. I'm getting a bit technical through the Deaths in Custody Reporting Act. And so what we've been asking for, right, what I've been advocating for, and what the National Medical Association has been advocating for, is a checkbox on the U.S. standard death certificate.
Please talk more about this.
Yeah. I mean, that's my stump, right? A checkbox. I am a user of the death certificate. So if there's a prescription pad for the type of doctor I am, my prescription pad is the death certificate. So I use a death certificate as a function of and it is such a useful tool. The reason why we know how many people are dying from smoking-associated cancers is because there's a smoking checkbox on the U.S. standard death certificate. Those are the types of things that have changed. Imagine if we didn't know how many people were dying from smoking, we would be in here right now smoking. But because of that, right? Because we know how many people are dying associated with smoking, there has been whole campaigns. There's whole foundations that are built upon decreasing cancer associated with smoking, right? And so what we believe is there needs to be a death in custody checkbox. Death in custody, arrest-related incarceration, these simple checkboxes. And the Centers for Disease Control, which is the vital registry, vital statistics system for this country, admired globally. I run a global forensic medicine community of practice right now that is partially funded by the Centers for Disease Control. And our vital registry, our death certificate, is the awe of the world, right? Everybody wants our complete system. It's flawed. There are some limits to it, but you can turn it on really fast. COVID, we turned it on really fast. We were all watching dashboards on how many people were dying, their age, their race, their gender, where they were dying. Why? Because people like me were signing those death certificates the way the CDC wanted us to sign them. Same thing with the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis, they made a call out. They wanted us to sign those death certificates a certain way so that we can understand whether or not fentanyl or heroin or cocaine, which element of the drug overdose was truly killing someone. The death certificate informed that. And so we believe that the death certificate is the proper place to really categorize and get transparency surrounding how many people are dying at the hands of law enforcement or in the custody of the criminal legal system. So, Pennsylvania's having a hearing coming up on this. There's a couple other locations that want to hear more about it.
Right.
And I'm hoping that the federal government will do it without a whole bunch of states having to do it
Right.
first.
Right.
But right now, the states seem to have to do it first. D.C. did it when I was the chief medical examiner of D.C.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for providing that context, because I think it's important. I didn't know that the federal government isn't tracking how many deaths are occurring
And
in
a lot of
custody.
people don't.
Right.
Every time I say, they're like, what?
You would think that's something that would be tracked. And so why do you think it's not being tracked?
Official ignorance.
Yeah.
I don't think, there's a stigma associated with the incarcerated person. Nobody goes around talking about their uncle that's in jail. Nobody really goes around talking about how their father was incarcerated. But when I'm in conversations, I was on the golf course not too long ago, playing golf with this. He owns his own business. He's multi-millionaire. We're hitting the ball around. He says, what do you do? And I told him about what we do and the podcast and everything. And he said to me, I didn't know my father because he died in jail. And we never knew what happened.
Right.
I was talking to a recent brother in the barbershop. He owns the barbershop. He said, my brother was killed in jail. And we never knew what happened.
Yeah.
I was giving a talk out in Pennsylvania. And this little old white woman comes up to me. And she said, I want to get involved. And I said, well, what do you want to do? She said, well, my son is in jail right now, and he has a brain tumor, and they won't operate on him. This is not a them over there issue, Nicole. It's not a black issue, a white issue. It's not it is a poor issue. It's affecting all of this country. It's definitely not a blue issue or red issue.
Yeah.
This is something that we all need to get behind. We need to have better oversight of our entire medical legal death investigation system.
Right. Yeah. Actually, out of the 10 cases that we've done this year in 2024, 9 of those cases occurred in a jail, a prison, or a detention center. So a lot of our cases, we do take cases that are in police custody. And I don't think we did a definition of in custody deaths. Can you actually just define, because you did your whole paper on defining in custody deaths. Can you explain what in custody deaths entail? I know we briefly talked about it, but just kind of just show the scope of cases that we're doing, just so people can really understand the wide scope
Remember
of cases
the
we're doing.
debate that we had early in the game?
Yes.
There was a big debate
On
about
language.
whether or not we call it death in custody or in custody deaths or, and when we first started out, there was this notion that we would be dealing with just police-involved deaths.
Right.
Right, because that's what people saw. That's what people were responding to, the George Floyds.
Right.
The Philando Castiles, the Eric Garners.
Right.
We say their names, right? Yep. So those are the ones that we thought we were going to, and I remember I said, guys, I'm telling you, those aren't going to be all of the requests. The majority of the requests that we're going to get are going to come from behind the walls. Those are the ones that we're going to get.
Right.
And that's the definition. The definition is any death, once you start chasing somebody to put them in jail. Right. So if there's a high-speed chase and that individual wraps themselves around a pole while law enforcement is chasing them, then that's a death in custody. Right. It will be a multiple blunt force trauma accident, right?
Right.
Wouldn't be a homicide. It would just be like another motor vehicle accident. But the byline is a death in custody, and then we can change policy on how individuals are chased.
Right.
Good example, there was a research paper that was done in California when I was first doing this work about using canine dogs. And there was a policy that canines would, when they found the person that they were let go to find, they would find and bite. And they would clamp down on the person's arm or their legs. And then these individuals would go into jail and they would have infections and maybe need amputation. And it was a lot of cost and it was a lot of hospital visits. And some people died.
Right.
They were tracking those deaths. They made a change. They said, find and bark. So instead of biting the individual, they found them in bark, 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 growl, growl, growl. They were still able to get the individual in custody, but the individual in custody had no bite injuries, which decreased the amount of infections, decreased the amount of deaths, all because of a change in policy.
Wow.
Right? Those are the types of things that we're talking about when we can start tracking the deaths.
Right.
Right? We can start tracking the injuries and we can start changing policy from a public health standpoint. So from the time we're chasing them to the natural death of the person that's been in there for 50 years and dies from a heart disease.
Right.
Or the individual that should be getting dialysis and is not. Or the individual that should be getting fed and get their schizophrenic medications.
Right.
And are not.
Right.
And they die on the floor of the Fulton County Jail.
Yep.
Right? So we get, that's the spectrum of the definition, and that's the spectrum of the work that we do here at Know Your Rights Camp.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you explaining that because I think that it's important for people to know the wide definition because we wanted to make sure we were including those cases as well because we have done our use of force cases, our police shooting cases, our tasering cases, but we've also done medical neglect cases while in jail. A lot of them we've seen of that. So I just wanted to make sure people
We've
were
done
understanding.
hanging suicides.
Yeah.
Right? From jails, right? So again, we've done naturals when it was a natural. We've done drug overdoses. Right? When there was no physical fault of the jail or the law enforcement.
Right. But it's, again, kind of tying back to what we said before, just having that second opinion is so critical to just actually ensure that we know what the cause of death is from our objective standpoint. And so I know we talked a lot just right now about even policy that could be changed. So what do you think that people that are viewing, that are listening in, what can they do to support the work that we're doing, to support your advocacy? What can people do to get involved?
Well, I think watching this podcast and supporting and listening to it all the way through, if you've gotten to this point,
right.
you've listened to what your marching orders are. One of the big things that I ask for people to do is to get informed. It's a big topic.
Right.
Get informed, and then once you're informed, there's opportunities for you to ask questions of your state legislature.
Right.
How many people are dying in the custody of our criminal legal system?
Yeah.
And ask for them to have hearings on it.
Right.
And ask for them to put a checkbox on the local state death certificate. Yep. And keep on asking for transparency. One of the things that we're asking for is fatality review committee on death in custody. We know that infant fatality review committees, maternal mortality review committees, they work. They're supported by public health infrastructure.
Right.
And we want that for death in custody as well. Because what is looked at, what's concentrated on, gets changed. When you turn on the light on something, sometimes it'll change just because you have a light on it.
Right.
And so we want to put a light. We want to put a light on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you say?
Yeah,
what's
I
your
agree.
marching orders?
Yeah, I have a few.
Please.
I agree. I do think that knowledge is extremely important. Knowledge of the issues to begin with. I think that your Deaths in Custody book, please read that. It's also understanding the systemic racism that's in these systems. I think you even tying in how lynchings didn't used to be counted. No one knew how many lynchings were occurring and making that comparison to today. And we don't know how many people are dying in custody. No one's counting it. And so I think that knowledge is extremely important. So I agree to become aware of these issues and see what you can do to be able to make an impact in your community. And I think something that I've learned at the Autopsy Initiative is even a small step can make a difference. If everyone is making small steps, we'll get to where we need to be. But I think that within the autopsy initiative, like I said, we would hope that these deaths would just not occur. But we know that the work that we're doing is still significant and still helping families. So I would say for people who are entering into the social justice space, entering into the civil rights space, entering into the public health space, that this is not easy work. The work that we do isn't easy. There's always something to do, always something we can improve on. So I would say to have the diligence and persistence to keep fighting for what you're passionate about and being an advocate in your community. I think that's something that you talked about as well. We all have the capacity to be an advocate. And so I also think that for the initiative's purposes, we have to work together. Like we said, we're providing nationwide services. So we need to partner with people nationwide who align with our mission. We need to partner with other legal organizations. We've partnered with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We've partnered with the National Police Accountability Project. We've partnered with Deloitte. We've partnered with USC's Agents of Change program. So we need to continue making partnerships nationwide because we can't do this alone. We want to be able to serve as many people in need as possible. And so that starts with getting the word out. So if you are listening to this podcast, please let people know that our initiative exists. And our primary purpose of having this initiative is to serve our communities who need these services. So I think the first step is letting people know. So do what you can do to speak about the issue and understand the root of its causes, and then see what it is that you can do. What can you commit to doing that will allow you to work towards a cause that has a greater purpose? And so I think that's just kind of a life lesson, is that as we're going through life, what are we doing for our communities? And I think just having that as a back focus that's always in your mind, or really a front focus, is that everything that we're doing, what are you doing to serve your community? And I think looking at life through that lens will allow you to make more strides and make the connections that you need to make to work with people who care. Because I think it's clear, you and I both have two different lenses that we're looking at this issue from, but we're both so passionate about it. And we've been able to collaborate and work together and understand each other's perspectives to be able to provide these services. So I think it's really just getting the word out, doing your research, speaking with people, speaking to your legislators, and advocating for your community. That would be my best advice. If anyone is interested in obtaining autopsy services, we have our autopsy request form online that will be processed, and we have an acceptance process. We would be sent an acceptance letter if accepted. So we want people to continue to find out about our services. Go on our Know Your Rights Camp website and look at our autopsy request form. We're hoping that no one listening is ever going to be in this situation. We're hoping no one has to experience an in-custody death of their loved one. But if you do, know that our program exists. So that would be my recommendation.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
It's been great sitting here and talking to you, and really getting to know you and know your passion, and the work that we're going to be able to do now and in the future as we expand, not just in this space, but into the public health space and healthcare delivery space for these communities. There's so much that we can do to support our community.
Absolutely. And we're going to continue to be working together. As we said before, please read Dr. Mitchell's Deaths in Custody book. Where can they find the book? Let us know.
deathincustodybook.com is where you can find it, and officialignorance.com is the podcast. I'll announce it here, fresh off the presses. We have a season 2 coming up.
Ah, exciting.
So please, go get the book. The book is on Audible now as well, so
nice.
you can listen to the book.
Yeah, I got mine on Amazon.
Yeah, so
I know
you
Amazon
get
too.
you can get yours on Amazon. Amazon needs to send us something for putting in plug out. But it's Johns Hopkins Press, so we're really excited, and it can be taught. We're building a curriculum, graduate level curriculum surrounding the book. So great. Academics, this is a criminal justice, social justice, legal studies, public health. It can live in all of those different spaces and be taught to really empower the next generation of thinkers surrounding this issue.
Wow, great tie-in, because Know Your Rights Camp mission is to elevate the next generation of change leaders. So that's who we're speaking to today. This is who our audience is, our next generation of change leaders. So thank you guys so much for watching, for listening in. Thank you for being here. It's been such a pleasure for us to be able to just talk candidly
Absolutely.
about what the work that we're doing. I know we're always doing so much work and so much, there's never not work to do. So we do really appreciate you taking the time to be here, because I think the message that we've been able to convey is really impactful. So we super, super appreciate you being here, and thanks so much.
Great to be here.